But it looks like we're pretty much, it's like our deal club. Our guy, we have our manufacturer.
Right.
So, money's already there. It's solid, ready to get in. And then Bob, you'll have a new thing. You'll have an assistant.
I think Minion sounds more dastardly.
I think that sounds fun.
That's exactly what it is.
It sounds familiar. For sure.
And I'm sorry, in the baseball hat, I don't remember your name.
Mark.
Mark, okay.
Mark.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've officially met, maybe it was.
No, I've been over here on that side, it's probably like looking at that screen there, yeah, and we were all spread out.
Oh, and you're the one, Mark, you're the one that took the whole library, correct? Yeah. Okay. Now,
Her research,
you're the
I know.
analyst.
yeah, I was the shaking it.
Curious to hear what you discovered. Did you make it through the whole library?
Oh, yeah, I went through all of it, and they're all the same mantra, get the money in, get yourself together, make sure you have a community, don't put it by yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, and they said you can do it, just, you have to, expectations have to be realistic.
Yes.
It's not like, oh, we're gonna get internet, we're looking into it, and possibly within 2 or 3 years, we could have something set up.
Yeah.
Depending on which way we go, infrastructure, that's the big,
Right.
you know.
I get that a lot. I talk to adults, and I'm like, why do you have such an unrealistic, you've been around a minute
Yeah.
on the planet here, so you surely know by now that nothing happens. Like that instantaneously.
Yeah, that's what's a song by The Clash. Should we stay or should we go?
Exactly.
Which way?
Should I stay or should I go
Do you want to
down?
go to infrastructure on your own and then have all this burden per se, but it's not considered a burden by other people, but they love it.
I know people call me all the time about the committee, and they're like, well, what about this, and when are we gonna do that? And I'm like, we can't even answer that question. We haven't answered any questions that come before that question.
Yeah, but they're saying it's still in the gel phase, so you haven't even, had a direction or a compass.
We just got the handout, the lab hasn't even started.
Have any of you gone to the boot camp sessions?
No, I
with
haven't.
them? Yeah, anyone?
I haven't had an
Yeah.
opportunity.
So they're all recorded, but anyone that asks me questions, I swear before we vote on this, everybody should actually go to these boot camp sessions to
I'm
understand
gonna watch it now.
all of the work that's gone through.
It's phenomenal. I mean, just for the county, regional or local, the other.
Yes, and that comes up in all of these, and you're listening to how all the other towns work through. Road Bluff started this process like 5 years ago before there was COVID, and now that it's COVID, everybody's jumping on it trying to get this done quickly. But there's a whole system on the pros and cons and what to do, what not to do.
Hey, Bob,
Yeah.
I want to start on that startup grant.
Okay,
Do you care? Are you ready? I mean, all it does is put some money in the bank and,
well, applying for it, just.
yeah, just
Yeah,
applying for it. I want to get,
absolutely.
I want to get in the line.
There's no reason why we can't work concurrently
Yeah.
on different aspects of it.
Yeah.
I mean, today, Winter Harbor approved, and I'll say it again, when everybody's on. Winter Harbor approved the first 4 bullet items.
Yeah, I
on
saw your.
on scope of work, so I mean, it's a start. And their concern was again, collaboration. I'm saying, look, we can collaborate, but honestly, there is no reporting structure. I mean, there's no Public Utilities Commission, there's no administration. I mean, essentially, we can work independently, we work together on certain things. But,
I don't understand why they are obsessing.
you know, Winter Harbor it's a turf battle.
Why? What turf? There's no turf to battle.
Well, that was the point I was trying to make. There's no turf
No turf.
whatsoever.
It's a mindset.
It is.
I remember we were at the Goldsboro Veterans Committee in Port Hayes, and Winter Harbor said, we're gonna do this year. And then I went, okay, well, Goldsboro also had, well, and because we were talking about having a high school band, and it was a struggle to get the band. And just, they had their ways, and they were not coming over.
You know what it reminds me of? That Dr. Seuss, the Sneetches.
So, yeah, I've got,
The star-bellied Sneetches, the plain-bellied
I'm
Sneetches.
not enforcing it, it's not my rule, but we have that. And just in case National Park shows up, I know somebody's working in the building.
He's online right now.
I mean, look, we got this far, I love it. We got this far. from
It's
one
very
of the-
broad.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good start. It's a start, let's put it this way.
And it's gonna take a couple of years, seriously, you know, before you get your feet on the ground and get everything together for the first, second year, and then finally, when you're finalizing everything. That the regular business will take that.
And you have construction to go,
And the companies you're dealing with, and then you're dealing with the prices now, like in gasoline, which is now fluctuating upward rapidly.
I would say it's fluctuating. It's not rising.
Yeah, yeah, it was just on the radio saying that his wife, this one person took his wife to the most expensive place in town, that was a Citgo station.
boycott, we'll go out.
My
It's a
son,
plan.
he was
It was planned this way.
person, I think it's.
Steal it a little.
So, right, I think afterwards, I think we may have a couple of things to talk about, sure. I know Jason's good, I believe Jason, oh, he is on
Jason's
there,
there.
Yeah.
And we have Roy Gruber there as well.
okay.
And I don't know how many others are planning on attending. I think everybody got the email, but certainly get started and then hold up Jason.
Jason's crucial at today's call, believe it or not. So. Yeah,
So we don't have a formal agenda, but as I mentioned over email, we do want to think about today before we leave, figuring out secretary, treasurer positions. But I would say let's have a guest. Let's not delay him any longer than possible unless anybody has any other crucial items.
well, I wanted to go through the first, I guess, the first 4 steps, so we can get the ball rolling on the project. And I guess step 1 was, who do we have up there?
So you got Jason.
Okay, Jason, raise your hand. There we go. Thank you. Hi, Jason.
and
Hello, everybody. I can hardly hear you, so if I have to ask you to repeat something, I apologize in advance. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Okay. And I'm Bob Bastinto, co-chair with Roy. We have
Mark Sopcich.
Sandy Gordon.
And Lee.
Paul McGrath. And then Roy Gruber also on Zoom, so.
So what you have here is the Winter Harbor Goldsboro contingency. So I guess might as well start off.
Pleasure to meet everybody.
Same here. Same
Thanks
here.
thanks for inviting me. Hopefully I can help with something.
Well, I'm sure you can. And last week, wasn't it? It seems like the week should kind of work. But we had preliminary approval from the town of Winter Harbor. I outlined the scope of broad project scope. And Winter Harbor approved the first 4 bullet items of this. And the first step is discovery. This is what we're in the process of, is discovery. And one of the things that you and I talked about, Jason, was utilizing GIS maps to determine where does the population reside, along what routes. And Winter Harbor is pretty simple, 186 down, Summer Harbor Road up, vice versa. In the case of Goldsboro, you have US Route 186 continuance, 195. So we have those routes. So those things to consider. Looking to see where the population resides along those routes, because it'll probably determine the order of building. Yeah, whatever we're going to come up with. Two would be correlating the data, what we have, unless it's already available. And number three, the big thing is determining the need of the population, a survey. The fourth one is I put together a list that I sent out a couple of weeks ago with respect to who's who in the project. So we had, right now we have Consolidated Communications, GWI, and Charter Communications. If there's somebody else that you want to add to the list, please let me know. And I'll include that in, because it's going to become important once we go to like an RFP. I understand there was another company that Sarah brought up, Starlink. So that's a satellite company. I haven't given much consideration to them, but hey, you can always invite them to respond. So, I mean, that would be probably a company where if you have a half a mile long driveway, where doesn't make sense to put a pole, you may want to consider that. I mean, all we're going to do is give options to people on what service or service providers they want to use. And of course, based upon the response from the various service providers as to what they can do in the course. So to me, the step one is GIS mapping. I understand, and GIS is Geographic Information Systems. Jason, I understand you had some GIS mapping available. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, certainly. Let me just see if I can share my screen here and then kind of give you a rundown of what we have. Is basically a starting point for pretty much anywhere in Maine or the United States, actually. Let's see. Oh, the host has disabled screen sharing.
Host is going to make you a co-host. You should be able to share now.
Okay. Everybody see a map? The colors? Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
So this is the area that you were speaking of. Obviously, everybody, I'm assuming, is quite familiar with. Goldsboro in this region here, Winter Harbor in this region. So just to kind of start with what we have, because this is well, first of all, this GIS tool I'm using is called QGIS. It's totally free. So if anybody has a computer with enough memory and CPU, they can certainly download and run this tool. The other mapping tool you may be aware of would be like a Google Earth kind of thing. Both are sufficient for viewing GIS, publicly available GIS data. Go ahead, was there a question?
Yes.
What is the name of the software you're using?
It's called QGIS or QGIS. Just add a Q to the front of the GIS term you referenced and you should be able to find it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so the data that the underlying map data is sourced from Google or open source maps, or there are a number of them. But in general terms, it's just a base map layer that I've loaded here. You can certainly see it with either the satellite view or street view. In this context, I think just given the contrast issue, I'll go with the street view. The FCC requires service providers to report the technology and up and download speeds of broadband that they provide in all of the United States based on something that's called census block data. And unfortunately, this is sort of an area of contention only because a census block is a boundary or a shape that's been determined by the FCC that probably is, for all intents and purposes, something that's very difficult to understand. So It seems almost arbitrary when you start looking at the shapes, but I'll drill in a little bit and get back to why that's important, and why it can also be a bit confusing. So if a service provider is providing either DSL or fiber or Starlink's wireless technology, they have to report to the FCC what the technology they're using is and what the greatest upload and download speeds are. That data is publicly available and downloadable from the FCC website. What we do at Mission Broadband is we take that information and we overlay it with the census block boundaries that are also downloadable, publicly available, and it gives us the ability to do some visualization of where the FCC's data allegedly represents that service providers have coverage. The problem, again, is that some of what drives the development of census blocks is based on population, and in some cases, the geographic area that a census block can cover can be quite large, but the number of actual folks who live in a census block, it can be pretty small. And in order for the service provider to file a record that they provide service, all they need is one instance of the service being provided within that census block. And what we see, because we work with a number of actual projects that are in process or have already been built, when you do a comparison of what the footprint using the census block geography looks like in comparison to where networks actually are, they often differ greatly, which in some cases misrepresents that coverage is available where it's not. Does that make sense? Does anybody have a question on that? I can certainly dig up some examples, but we also have had some large clients we've worked with who are, electric companies who know who's attached to their poles. And when we have information, the more data we have, the more we can look deeper at what's going on. But a case in point is, they'll know whether or not whether or not a cable company, for example, is attached to their poles, and we can extrapolate from that data where cable really is. But when we look at the census block FCC data for where cable is reported being, there's a huge discrepancy and deficit. The folks like yourselves who are on the ground and work and live with the people in the areas know where you can and can't get service, in some cases better than this data will reveal. But that said, it's sometimes all we have to start with. So we still use it, we still view it, just kind of important to get the caveats out front so nobody is confused by what you see. And of course, it will still, I'm sure that will still be the case in some instances. The purple dots on the screen are what is called E911 address data, is actually available in large for almost all of the state of Maine. I think there are close to 400,000 points of data available, and that again is also freely downloadable. Maine.gov publishes that information. So I've done some quick looking, and the data that we had already collected from some open source address data correlates pretty well with the E911 location data, and give or take, we've got about 1,330 addresses, 31 addresses in Gouldsboro, and about 556 locations in Winter Harbor. Using, somewhat outdated population data, we have a pretty good amount of I would say, the representation of the base. We certainly don't have everybody, but it again gives us a good starting point for analysis. And of course, the streets associated with those addresses is also a layer that's downloadable. There are other sources for street level data too. So again, what you're seeing here, the only other thing I think I didn't talk about is the RDOF maps, where service providers who've won awards for RDOF, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund monies, are represented by these sort of purple angled colored areas. So in QGIS, I can navigate my layers on the left here, turn things on or off. You had mentioned some of the carriers. You might be surprised that, of course, this list represents all of the providers who have a record in a census block for all the counties, since the work we've been doing here that I had already sort of started to construct is countywide. The list is going to be longer than what's available in Gouldsboro and Winter Harbor. Also should note that the data is only as of December of 2020. The FCC does not make the data publicly available as soon as it's submitted. I know that we just did some, or helped some organizations do some filings for March of this year, and you can see by the date, of course, that we're a little bit behind, but we only can get what's been publicly released as far as the SEC is concerned. So, any questions yet? Checking right. Go ahead.
Jason, does that represent multifamily units? Say for instance, I have a 2-family or a 3-family, or does it just?
Yeah, I believe so. Let me kind of just I'll pick a random area here. I'll kind of zoom in where this cluster is. And, you know, as I zoom in, give my computer a minute to catch up with me. You'll see that these purple dots, and if you can't see it well from where you are, I can certainly make them larger. Are they showing up?
Actually, above the Wind Harbor Food Service, there is the multiple dwellings there, multiple family units. That's actually where
Yeah,
Bob
just
was.
above there.
You were right on
So
it.
see right here, I've got a dot probably for each one of those units. Kind of zoom in here.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Yep.
Bob's up in the upper right house from there.
Give my computer a minute here.
No problem.
Problem with QGIS is it will draw every dot that's in the scope of the layer, not just the ones you can see. So unfortunately, it's redrawing the whole, which kind of gets a little bit crazy at times.
You had a question?
Here it comes. There we go. So there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 actual data points in that one building. And if I grab this layer, which I have, I can actually put my cursor on any one of them and kind of bring up what's available. So that first dot highlighted is 72 Misty Harbor Drive. Tells me the county. I don't have names. I just have Latin long and the address. So it's a pretty good working set, I'd say.
Sandy?
Jason, I had a question about FCC. Does Starlink, are they required to file with FCC? And how would we be able to layer what connectivity we have through Starlink?
So, sorry, I think I got your question. You just want to know how Starlink, for example, would have to report and how their data would be represented in the FCC data, the 477 data?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually do have, they are represented in the provider as SpaceX Technologies Corp. And they look like another, a satellite carrier. So we've had satellite carriers, as you know, for a long time, like, I don't know, Usenet. Yeah. So if I go in here, I've created a couple different views of that data. One allows me to look at them explicitly. So if I go ahead and click on SpaceX and zoom to that layer, you'll see that represents the census block boundaries that they've reported as of December of 2020 that they have some coverage in. Kind of zoomed out, but you can see that it's predominantly in the Swans Island area, which obviously doesn't pertain to you yet, but they've made some significant changes, right, since December 2020. So we won't see that data yet unless you're doing a study and you are appealing to the providers to give you information about their coverage. And that's typically better than this anyway, because then you're going to get street level coverage. And we would then, turn that into a visual representation at that level and then color code by bandwidth or something of that nature. Does that help? Did that answer your question?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. So if I zoom back to Gouldsboro, just as an example here, you can see there's nothing for SpaceX, but if I walk, the problem is that, some providers who offer the same technology or whatever, the order here may overlap. So if you want to see them explicitly, that's important. Otherwise, you can sort by technology type. And if I want to see everything that's cable and fiber in this footprint, you can see that if I literally was just using 477 data, there's a lot covered, right? And if I zoom in, just pick an area. Because it doesn't look like, there's a lot of people living in the middle of the census block. But if I grab that census block, highlight that that's a census block. So that whole red region represents a single census block. I've got the census block ID over here on the right. I know that it's Charter Communication, and they're saying that they advertise consumer or residential service, and you can get 940 meg by 35 meg up, 940 down, 30 up for this whole area. I would say that, clearly, if you found a way to live in the middle of that, you're not going to get it, but the FCC data would suggest that you could, right? That's the issue. So I think in a nutshell, I might have covered the majority of, what we have at our disposal and how we can turn that into useful information. I certainly could go deeper. I haven't done it, but I could run a query report that says, okay, let's of all of the 1331 I have, how many of them, and can you give me, I can give you separate lists of who lands in a census block that can get cable, or who's if I turn off fiber and just turn on DSL, for example, you'll start to see that we're getting a lot more coverage, which is because the incumbent copper-based services almost always have some flavor of DSL available, although they're saying in this zone here that I've just randomly selected, 25 meg by 2 is available. So all they need to do to be able to qualify, a whole census block is have some service in that area, which can happen in just one small corner of a census block. But it's a starting point. I don't want to say it's, useless entirely, but other good sources of information. The Maine Broadband Coalition website has started, an active approach to encourage people to do speed testing. Anybody who does speed testing on the Maine Broadband Coalition's website gets recorded. That data gets recorded, and that is also exportable and useful for any communities that want to have, an active study done and may or may not qualify for grants as a result of what their findings are. So as many of couplings of actual speed test data you can conduct, getting data from service providers to represent where network exists, and then using the the existing FCC data, I think all combined can paint a picture, no question. And I think we've got a fairly good base address subset here. The other things we can do with this is if we don't have network data, we can even estimate, using a standard interval distance, if you will, between poles on routes. We can actually build a really high level network design by plotting fake poles and then counting them and the distance between them, and do some estimations on, if we were going to build fiber to the home network here, how would it look? What are the distances and mileage? Where would we put equipment and possibly head-end locations, et cetera, so we can come up with some really high-level costing estimations if you get to the point where you're doing a feasibility study. But in most cases, your partners to be or service providers, depending on whether or not you're going to own the network or let a service provider own it. Getting a little ahead of myself, but all of this information lends itself throughout the process. So getting a good basis early on is important. Yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell. Certainly happy to drive this anywhere you want to go or dig in deeper on any aspect of it. But
Jason, this is Bob.
Yeah.
It's been intimated that they're looking for ultimate solution would be fiber to the building, fiber to the premise. Is there anybody deploying fiber along the existing routes?
That's a good question. Just looking at the streets you were talking about in these two areas, if I go back to my technology data and turn on fiber, not seeing a lot in those two areas. I am seeing something in sort of the middle here, which assumes that either there's fiber down here. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say there's a route along 195. The problem is it's not being reflected here, but it is here. So I definitely would want to know more about you know, and then certainly in this region, right in the
But
middle.
would that be dark fiber they deployed?
Absolutely. It's, you know, they're lighting it to provide
Uh-huh.
service. But if I click on that, this is First Light, which is one of the companies I don't think you mentioned.
Hmm.
First Light does have fiber. What's interesting is it is not flagged as being residential grade, is a business only technology. So again, I don't know whether they're buying someone else's fiber or what, but just because that shows doesn't mean that the residents in that area can get that service, but maybe there's a potential business case to be made, or they're working on one, but I would not discount them as being a possible future partner.
So to that, Sandy does have a question, but I just wanted to quickly respond. I was reached, Jim McLean reached out to me last week because they're looking to have fiber brought into the town office, and they are working with somebody to do that. So it does exist, and it is currently being deployed. But yeah, I think the question is if it's available to residential other than business. But Sandy.
My question kind of piggybacks off of that, Jason. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our area, but we have thousands of acres of conservation land. And I wondered how that's going to impact our process and ability to get connectivity to some locations.
Probably not something I've dealt with in my experience, and I didn't tell you, but I mean, I've been in this business for 25 years. I'm certain that, you know, what the focal point would be is to get an understanding of where you need to take it to, and then look at what your options are. Are you, just to be clear, the conservation land, is it that you would have to traverse it, in your opinion, or that the destination where folks are on or located on or close proximity to conservation land, or maybe the answer is both?
I don't think there's any new poles that we really be having to put in unless somebody's really off the grid, in which case they're still not going to be living within the conservation.
That's right.
So I think you have the established corridors infrastructure.
Right. That's a great point. You're not talking about setting new poles predominantly. You're looking at a way to attach to existing, and make ready is one of the most time consuming and costly parts of the whole project, right? So again, unless it's the pole owner that's doing the work.
It's a little bit more down the line, thinking about grants and availability for rural development when we have so much land that's considered conservation. So I'm just trying to think down the line for grants if that's going to impact our sort of our process. That's all.
Yeah, to whoever just talked, and I apologize, I can't recognize everybody's voice, but it sounds like the likelihood isn't going to of it being an obstacle isn't as big as you may think, because the destination of where you're getting to is somebody who already has utility service.
Like you're saying, Sandy, if there is new development, previously undeveloped area, it's still going to be outside of accessible to, or accessible by some road or way that's probably not running through the conservation, I would expect.
Or they have an easement.
Or they have an easement. And if they're going to have electricity, they're probably going to have poles. So I think broadband,
If they're on the grid.
right, if they're on the grid. If they're not, then probably something like Starlink would be their best route if they want to go that way. But I think there's ways.
But we're not gonna do microwave. So. Well, don't laugh, that microwave, like when 9/11 happened, when towers went down, that was a big transmission area. And they were doing 2.4 gigahertz dish to Jersey. So that was all microwave, that was a great shot. Yeah, not in this case.
Fiber was the backup.
I'm sorry?
In the 9/11, fiber was the backup to the Microsoft.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, if someone's asked me a question, I apologize again. It's difficult to make out sometimes what you're saying, but
Yeah. Jason, just quickly, so are you, Mission Broadband is the one that's partnered with Hancock County, correct?
Correct, yes.
And so how does any of the survey data that has been collected, is that reflected in this data here that you're showing us?
No, this data set so far is exclusively limited to all publicly available data. There's no incorporation of survey data yet in what I've been working on.
Is the survey data still being collected?
So I'm not working on that project directly, so I believe it is. I know that we've also been working on a number of individuals like yourselves at a lower level. I can certainly take that question back. I think JD's probably been more involved. And I also don't know that the survey data would have any geodata in it, other than maybe a street number and street name. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, we are working on some other projects to enhance the ability to create a better geolocated address incorporated with the survey. But we're not there yet. But the survey data is really helpful, obviously, in determining, sort of at a larger sort of viewpoint, what's the demographic, what's the makeup of the types of homes in a particular area, how many of those folks already have an internet connection, of those, what kind is it, what's the technology behind it, what are they, what's the services, price packages being offered, are people happy with the pricing, are they trying to do things like, work from home? Are they trying to shop from home? The list goes on and on, as you know. And, again, I think it's really an effort to sort of fill in a gap, to paint the picture, to say, yeah, this is a huge area. X% of everybody, X% of those who have been polled are not happy, can't get service, it's too expensive, it's unreliable, and, so on and so forth. As far as geo representing the results of that data, unless we can tie the street number and the street together with good already located data, then there wouldn't necessarily be a good way to visualize that. But we can do it when we can do it, we do it. Let me state it that way.
Does it take into account too any commercial businesses like Young's Groceries, the animal hospital in Wilkesboro?
What was the question?
Does it take into account the mapping there show any commercial businesses like in Goldsboro?
Yeah, so if it's a 911 address, it's in my data set. Is that what you're asking, the data that I have here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we could certainly test it. If you had an address in particular you wanted to look for.
Well, even the dots you can see on there, that
Hang on.
it is identifying businesses on there.
I'm glad you can see that.
I mean, you can see Winter Harbor Food Store.
Oh, I can see the other one.
Yeah. They're all represented as far as I can tell.
Okay.
Which is obviously going to differ because we're talking about buildings, not population, right? So if I have 556 locations, I probably have a really good representation. I think the population, I don't know what the population is at last count, but I'm not even sure it's that high, right?
No, that's more than just, there's 500 or so registered voters. No, it's population.
The census,
The
right,
census,
the population is under 500, it's Winter Harbor. But if you're saying
1,600 registered voters in Goldsboro.
Right. So the point being is that we are representing location data in this data set versus its 911 addresses. So an address could be 1, 2, 3 or more people, or none.
Well, in the case of Winter Harbor, you have permanent residents, and you have your summer residents. That reflects, so it goes from like, so I think Sarah mentioned there were 361 full-time residents. And then it goes up to like a little over 500 in the summertime. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's definitely a factor. But again, the survey data is intended to profile the residents as a location and then try to come up with some numbers, if you will, around how many folks live in those locations, and if you have children, if they're going to school or attending college, et cetera.
Right.
That's what the survey tends to get to. This really here for what I'm looking at would be, okay, these are the locations, and then we would sort of cross-reference them with what we know about existing networks providers and what available services exist, so we can then determine what's the gap analysis. So if we wanted to build to 100% of these locations, what's it going to take, and how much is it going to cost, and then we look at the proximity to the other partners or other providers, and sometimes it's obvious. Okay, if we just got the local cable company to build 5 extensions, here, here, and here, we could get 100% or something of that nature. That's kind of how it could go, depending.
Right, and in the case of,
I think it's kind of timely right now. The 2 comp planning boards are hot and heavy on putting together a survey. We have one now, came out, not available to the public yet. But why aren't we using that survey to survey about broadband? I mean, why duplicate the effort and do another survey?
oh, yeah, well, I agree.
I
Anything that,
think you're on the comp planning board.
Yeah.
You're not on-
We have about 4 questions related to broadband that just came up like last week, so.
'Cause that
we're
seems
also-
like a cheap and easy way.
Yeah.
Because I know the town's gonna pay for postage for foods, but we're gonna actually mail it out. So many people don't have internet to respond to it. That's an unofficial statement.
I mean, it's just been done, yeah, you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just, continuing on that, I know there was some dissatisfaction with how some of the survey questions on the Hancock County website apply to our communities. I would say that would be a good opportunity to fill in those particular blanks.
Yeah.
And it's also, it would probably engender a little bit more trust in people answering it, because one of the things that I ran into seeing people talking about the survey in Franklin was they got to the question, basically, it's like, what would you pay more than you pay now for better service, or whatever the question was, what would you pay for service of this level? And people read that as, oh, they're trying to sell me something. And I was like, I understand why why they look at it that way, because people are now so used to having everybody try to sell them things. But I think it's important also to make sure in our language that we're letting people know we're not selling you stuff. We're just trying to find out what is of value to you. What would you be comfortable with if the service were available? So I don't know. What's the format of the survey? How's it going to be distributed?
We're gonna mail it.
Okay.
Which is huge. We're gonna put it on our website too, but because we have so many people who just don't have connectivity, we're gonna pony up the money to mail it out. We mail out our newsletter every month, so
Right.
we're just, it's pretty much looking like that's how it's gonna go. And I've seen a conflict every week. So
I think direct mail is going to give you some of that legitimacy that people will be looking for, because you spent money to reach out to them. So,
yeah, I think a lot of people just identify with writing on paper. Get more out of people. Give a paper.
Sandy, what are the types of questions that you would identify for broadband?
For broadband, so. I
So-
should have used one.
You said 4 questions.
Yeah, there were 4 questions. I was trying to find the exact verbiage. I don't have any on this device. I can forward that to the group so that they have that. I think that our comp plan is going to be on Thursday. So I think maybe if we share between the 2 comp chair people and or go through email first, whichever works best.
I mean, I think our company boards are pretty much working together.
Yeah.
We work with Hancock County too. They work with us on our comp plan because we get the bill for it. There's so much resource available to us to gather up information so that you're not. And I think in mapping and survey, I actually helped the 911 stuff up to date. That's part of my job. Was Jim. We have all the maps, everything in the office, like all the data that we need, I think we get between what we keep in our office and survey.
That's good.
We have a lot of road.
Would you be willing to share that?
Absolutely. I mean, Jim is absolutely 100% on board with giving me whatever I want so that he doesn't have to do it because he's busy. Spring's coming. We're about to review our roads and there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of free data we can get. And I think if we have a real survey of real people that really care and not some worthless satellite, but real addresses with real answers, that'd be super valuable.
So I did find the comprehensive plan. Internet communication, do you have access to the internet, yes or no? If yes, what access do you have? Wire, cable, satellite, hotspot, cell phone, other. Is it access adequate to your needs, yes or no? And how do you use the internet? Job-related, school-related, friends and family, information research, local or home-based business, telehealth, security systems, entertainment, none of the above or other. I know there's another one buried here somewhere that was under, again, this is a draft survey, so we haven't agreed to anything yet. We're still working this out.
I would caution you about method of connectivity, whether it's wire or cable or fiber. People may not know. They know they have spectrum. They know they have Comcast. They have,
Yeah, I think we asked that.
And it may be useful in that case to include, rather than wired, say DSL, and then in parentheses, we know there is one DSL provider in here, consolidated.
right.
Just to, so people, I mean, obviously you can have different services, spectrum, but just to make it as simple for people to answer. And I would also say, if a question that would be worth having in there, and it does mirror some of what the survey of Hancock County did, would be if they know what speed they get, report that. And the price as well. And that, I think that's going to be good information, the price, but it's also going to be really variable because I know people who have 5 megabit service on DSL who are probably paying like $70 a month just because they've never changed and they've never balked at the price increases. I think it's good to know what people are paying, but it's also, we got to take it with a grain of salt. We're going to get really very responsive to that.
Never knew enough to ask the question.
I think also if you source the data from various different places, you're going to see what correlates eventually. You're going to see where things are lining up. And so it's not, I think we should try it. Short of standing in the street and stopping. And we're almost there because that's going to give us the best data that we have. It's going to help us pro forma what it's going to cost us to pay the fiber.
Yeah, I mean, do people realize that a lot of the times they're bundled services? They have, besides internet, because this is primarily what we're focused on, is that they may have cable. But, and do they really look at their bill? I pay $150 a month. Well, is that, $79 for internet and the rest is cable or what, so.
And then people who mix and match too.
Right. And you have people who cut the cord exclusively internet, but they're doing like.
That's what I do. We have 5G in Millbridge, we don't have anything else.
We'll talk about 5G.
But I mean, we have the high speed all the time. And it's amazing how many people just don't even have cable.
Well, see, that's the thing.
I'm not allowed to listen to television, but I watch it from afar.
Yeah, there's 3 types of 5G. The 600 megahertz, there's the 50 millimeter or so wavelength, and then there's sub 600 megahertz. So depending what you have in Norwich, which is I suspect you have 600 megahertz, because you have good building penetration. The millimeter wavelengths, you don't. Right there, and you can only maybe the distances if you're lucky, 200 feet from the units.
May I recommend that the broadband committee put together some questions that we feel would be important and submit those to the comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
Because I'm not able to access the other questions I have. I only have limited info, but if we can take that back to the comprehensive plans and ask them to integrate that, I think that would be really helpful.
Well, that is step 3 on the scope of work. So as to gather that information,
Gather
do the
information,
surveys,
yeah.
because we can't move forward until we get the survey.
I have a preliminary survey right now. It's not high yet. I just sent Deb a text message about asking if we can add some stuff to it.
Mr. McGrath.
Back to the presentation and the QGIS software, could you also send out where we can get the underlying data that you're displaying here?
Yeah, I can put a summary together.
Just, I mean, just a quick guide of where to pick up the points, lines and polygons and, you know,
We can break it down to like,
and then, you know, census data, and we can interpret it. I mean, just rather than everyone go out and search for it and try and figure it out, so. Appreciate it.
Sure, sure.
Hey, Jason, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Roy.
Okay. I guess the answer to finding out who has what is probably more reliable if it came from the providers themselves. And have you found any, in your experience, that any of them are actually willing to release, not by name, but by E91 address, the service that they provide?
In some cases, I mean, it depends on where it is. In some states, it's much easier. Maine isn't the easiest one.
Yeah.
But
some providers think that's proprietary information and won't give that out.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, and that's the rub, because that data is going to be more reliable than any survey data that we get from you know, residences or regular people, I think.
I would argue that they will give you what they are saying they're providing, not exactly what I'm receiving,
yeah,
for a lot of reasons. So
Yeah.
I would welcome that data if they would provide it, but I think we also have to take it
Agreed.
as a, okay, that's interesting, but they're, you know, you say you're delivering 100, but I'm getting 5.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
I'm getting 2010.
To that point, Don Carter and Franklin did reach out to somebody who got the spectrum map that showed, that highlighted the roads where they have service. I have a meeting with her for Franklin Broadband on Thursday, I think. I'll try and ask her how she came to get that. It may have been just a cooperative customer service representative. It may not be something that they really want to give out a lot of. Consolidated, I don't know about that one. But obviously DSL, we know that, you know, obviously anywhere there's phone service, you would have the potential if they have the range to the D-SLAM or an extender. Even that, further out you get, we know the service degrades.
this speed test data that's on the main Broadband Coalition's website is also, if you request it, they will give it to you in a spreadsheet. So if you encourage your town's residents to use this speed test, you know, the underpinnings of it was selected carefully to try to create a good, fair representation of what their experiences are. You can see there's not a lot of results in this area. So it's not being used as widely, I think, as they hoped yet. But it's, again, another data point. If you zoom into this area, you'll see there's a number of tests that we're running here. These are all Fairpoint tests. They are red, which means they're less than 10 meg, probably DSL, right?
DSL.
So no question. But
So,
it's really
question on that.
go ahead.
Question on that speed test. I have yet to get it to work at my house.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It says, okay, I've connected to your server. Usually it's out in California.
Yep.
I'm there. And then it comes back and says, nope, you don't have anything. And I'm online. So,
And this is the main broadband coalition's test. Is that right?
yeah. And then I take a screenshot and send it to the support group. And I've done that 3 times with no response.
I
You
got
go
you.
out to California, you're looking at about 80 millisecond latency anyway.
Yeah,
well, mean,
I talked to the University of Maine, and I'm familiar with the methodology they use for the testing. I'm not 100% on board with it, but it is what it is. The
Yeah.
other tests you probably are familiar with are like the Ookla speed test. We've been working on a partnership with them to collect data, but we're not abandoning the Broadband Coalition, but the data that is collected, anybody who conducts a speed test using our website, for example, gets logged, so we can actually look at the underlying data and use it in concert with a survey if we were running one. So we're trying to get to the point where we can create a better comprehensive data set, marrying the survey data with the actual speed test. And Ookla seems to be a little bit more, I don't know, reliable, but it's difficult because if your speed test server that you're testing against isn't in the right location, in my mind, it could give misleading results, which I'm sure is the case with any one of these speed tests. So it's kind of like each one of these things isn't perfect, but the more of them that you can incorporate into the analysis, the better, closer you're going to get to having a better picture, for sure. And the other thing you can always do is kind of, start surveying the poles, walking down the streets and logging. We've actually been party to surveys where we recorded who's attached to the poles and start mapping networks that way. But it's a lot of time and labor involved in that approach. But
Just an FYI, I just ran the speed test here and I got 33 up and 35 down, and we're provisioned for 40 by 40. Other people may be using it too, so.
Well, see, that's the thing. The speed tests to me are dubious anyway, depending on where you are on the run. Okay, you're inside wiring, the levels on the pole, the wire cable coming into your home, and the type of router you have.
yeah,
If you have an older router or older Wi-Fi unit,
exactly.
you can
Don't
bring
forget
it
the
over
Wi-Fi.
a period of time. So I mean,
Someone might be microwaving a cup of ee or something. That shit too.
well, exactly. So
Well, and I think you were not part of the group at that point, but I had sent out an email that had a lot of background on it, and I tried to break it down for non-experts. And the problem is, to get really accurate speed tests, you have to do a lot of education, and people might not be in a position where they can wire a device into their router so there's nothing else between them and the internet service. And they might have 3 iPhones in the house downloading the next great operating system at the same time.
So if we want good data, would it be helpful to engage youth in this process to really set a format of how we're collecting our data?
Engage the youth. They would be more adept at creating the ideal conditions than many adults would.
But creating in not ideal conditions would require that people enter the house.
Well, no, I mean, you can.
According to what you were just saying, that you want to be hardwired into the router,
Right.
that you have to go in the house. I'm sorry.
These would be the residents.
Right.
Doing it. They'd already be in the house.
Okay, I'm just saying that, and then we get into the whole issue of having people go into other people's houses or.
No, it's a self-survey. You would do it yourself in your own house.
if you have 5 devices,
We were talking about the youth going in to assist to make it stand.
Well, I didn't get the going into other people's house. I was thinking of it, reaching out to the youth in the community, and then they would take that information back to their own. That's how I was envisioning it.
There are many homes that don't have youth.
There are.
I mean, doing a speed test to me, is useless. It really
And
is
then it's a
useless.
question of functionality.
There's a lot of factors that go into it, all right? You know, you're right, 5 devices, well, you take 4, power them down, so you look, 1 device, you're right. How old is your router? All right, what speed are you, you know, are you 5G connected internally or what? Something less. Is everything up to date with firmware, software on your router, on your Wi-Fi system? I mean, there's a lot of factors. And plus the fact a lot of carriers throttle back. There's data caps. So I mean,
Well, it's useless if we're trying to find the ceiling. It's not, if we do run a speed test, we know that at that time, whatever you get, at least that degree of service.
well, you know what? I'm contract though. Minimum speed like on Spectrum is 100 meg. Okay, are you getting 100 meg? No. You know, besides the overhead, the signaling criteria may lose 8K, 8 meg rather on signaling, but you're not going to get 100 meg. You're lucky you get. I'm lucky I get 22.
It's variable. When I had Spectrum, I was provisioned for 100. I got 104. So it varies.
It does vary. You're absolutely right. Where you are, how far is the central office? Where's the amplifier? Okay, so a lot of factors come into play. The point being though is connectivity. This is really what we're talking about is connectivity. I think we can all agree that DSL is not the way to go. They're not putting any money into G-Slant. I mean, and they're not going to. It's copper. It's dead. Dead. It's like this parrot is dead. This parrot's dead. I mean, forget it.
We all need a little money, Python.
Yeah.
No, you're
Ceases
not.
to exist.
It's fine.
Stop talking. But I mean, so I mean, we just, I think to make it easier, I think it's a given that in terms of accuracy, a speed test, plus the fact it's a ping test, all right, up and down. It's low priority on the scale, all right? So I mean, to me, it's almost like best effort, you know, on that. So I mean,
I would encourage, and this might be something that doesn't mesh with that plan. If we're asking these questions in a survey, we're developing these questions, the survey is going to be mailed out, then we could certainly, if it's permissible, encourage people to also, if they're interested, perform a speed test and give them a web address that could be hosted on the town's website. Say, these are the ways to make your speed test most accurate. Here's the mission, here's the main Broadband Coalition website. They're collating this data. So if you can run a speed test under the best conditions possible, you know, give it your best shot.
Yeah.
At least it's data. And if somebody wants to do it, they'll do it. If they don't want to do it, they don't.
that's fair.
I would agree with you on that. I think to get them to participate would be a great way of doing it. So giving them how to do it, but I would also take the results with caution.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Remember, there's a lot of people that don't have any service, and these are new entries into the market, and that's important data to have when you go and start courting these vendors.
Oh, sure.
So that's why I want to do it by mail. That's why I've been asking.
That's a great
to do
idea.
it by mail.
If you have no service, go to step, go to the end, question 25, and mail it back. Thank you. You're done.
I mean, part of why we're doing what we're doing for our internet is so that we can have some hotspots near the town office so that people can come. You know, because I have the library, they can use the library, and now the historical society is going to add, that's what they want to do. So clearly there's a need.
Yeah.
So if we
Not
can see,
disputing
if
that.
we can really see the census of who doesn't have internet, I think that's.
I think every town hall should be a hotspot.
That's why your first-
Emergencies or whatever, you know.
And that's why your first question is, do you have internet service?
Yeah.
And if you don't, well, then you can get into other questions like, what would it, that will get to, what would it be worth to you to have internet service? What would you like to do?
At the very minimum, it adds value to people's real estate. That's just a fact, whether they want to do it or not. It does.
It may be an obvious question, but do you want internet service? And there are people who just don't want it,
Sure.
you know? Yeah, I don't have it, I don't want it, I don't care.
It's another expense.
Yeah, I have no need for it. My life has been good for the last 60, 70, 80, 90 years. Why do I need it?
I don't know what Jason's time constraints are, but do you think there's any other questions he would be able to answer for us, or?
Well, Jason, if you have the, was it QGIS is a website?
Software.
Software,
It's software, it's this, what is it doing?
okay.
Yeah, it's a open source mapping software package.
Great. I have one question for everyone. I'm not familiar enough with the data that is captured when you do a speed test. Is the carrier provided when you do a speed test?
I'd say it depends on the provider of the speed test, but generally, yes, it would show who your internet provider is.
Okay.
And it would show your upstream bandwidth, your downstream bandwidth, and a ping, and often some other network ping.
Good.
It
Thank you.
goes through like a trace route.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, most speed tests are doing some kind of transfer of data and measuring the performance of that transfer. The IP address that you happen to have when you're doing the speed test is what's used to determine what service provider you're using, because the service provider has registered the IP address with Aaron. So that's how they know who you are. They don't know whether or not you're on fiber, cable, copper, wireless. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, I'm listening to, obviously, we've heard these things many times, and right, we know that there are places where cable is the provider, and they advertise gig service, but not everybody's happy because they've oversold or oversubscribed the service, or they don't have sufficient capacity in a certain area. You really have to sort of slice and dice this into digestible, manageable chunks, right? What is your goal? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to fix the cable provider's network, or are you trying to determine who has no cable? Maybe you're trying to do both. I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing I've sort of heard at the end of these conversations are people know that fiber is really where it's got to go if you're going to be future proof, and if you're going to get involved in building or participating in fundraising or enhancing an area's coverage, that generally speaking, fiber seems to be the goal, right? The copper's out. We know that. They beat that up for years. I did that for years. I remember when 56K was cool and I had 40,000 customers on that, and I was super happy. That's gone. And DSL, we've wrung it out completely. I think cable companies are struggling right now with the next versions of DOCSIS. There's not a whole lot more they're going to do. So their hybrid fiber is going to hold on for a while. Then fiber is going to be their answer too. So that's really, I think, what you're trying to figure out, I think, is what does the land look like? What do people have for options? Is there fiber already? Because if there isn't, then you got to get it somehow, or help people get it. And you can get into the weeds a lot on the speed test results. That's a different exercise to some degree, because a lot of the providers have issues that they need to fix, and that's a different issue. But or it can be. I don't know if that helps in any way, shine a little bit of a light on the perspective. But I think if you just focus on what you want to accomplish in a manageable factor, you'll get where you want to go with it. This area is obviously, just like a lot of the areas we've seen, people are just not happy. That's going to come out in your survey no matter what, whether or not they're able to do a speed test or not. And then as you point out, if they can't get on the internet to take the survey, that's where I think you're talking about doing the mailings and capturing some of the results that way. We've seen a lot of people print out their surveys and put them in the town office, and they come back in stacks, and we have to key them in to get the results tabulated. But that's an exercise that I've seen people go through that yields some valuable information. So the other thing that you can't tabulate is a lot of the surveys I've seen have areas in the end where people can write in comments, and we've seen some really heartfelt and touching individual case situations where you know, we've got medical concerns, or, you know, someone's diabetic, whatever the situation. And, you know, you can't quantify that and capture it unless you're looking at each one of those. So there's a whole other dynamic going on there. But thank you guys for having me. I'm happy to share, you know, what's available out there. And if you have any questions along the line, please feel free to reach out. And I'm sure I'll be here again in another context.
Great.
Well, Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's good to meet everybody. I got to jump to another meeting.
All right,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
So just quickly, I know we talked about coming up with questions. Obviously, we can do that over email, but we're also here as a group. Might be easier if we wanted to come up with a list of questions that we thought were important right now, and then there's less back and forth emailing.
I also want to tell the committee something, especially you. I had a call late Friday from Bill at the Clam Lab. And you know, they're like the belle of the ball right now in our community. And they're getting a lot of money to do a lot of things, and we've got now shoreline conservancy. But what she was saying is they're working on a hotspot, and they are super hot to find out what we're doing and get involved with us. So I think you should put that somewhere, file that in the list of alliances.
Right now, the only hardwired connection over there is either 1.5 or 3 megabit DSL.
Oh, that's
So
it?
that he's hot, he was super hot.
See, now we're using, I set up at the church an LTE modem. So we're coming off the for Charlie. Now we get, you know, easily 25.
Just keep that in mind, because when we get into fundraising,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stakeholders. Some stakeholders seem small, but are much bigger than we realize, and they're essential to the community, and that's one of them. Guys,
But we're gonna,
like,
but
economically, it's huge.
yeah, but we're like behind, like gonna be a while before we get 50% for everything here, get our infrastructure, financing, etc.
Right. I'm just saying, file
Sure.
that somewhere
Yeah.
in your mind, that Clam Lab wants to
Yeah.
be one of our darlings or whatever, you know, of needing that connectivity. Yeah, and we have all this research going on around here, nobody does it, it's great.
It is.
In this day and age.
Mhm.
There's a lot to think about. I think initially gathering the best data that we can get is the most important. Because that's what we're gonna plan on.
Well, again, with the survey, you know, not only residential, but businesses, everybody that's,
I will walk through the town and ask questions, I don't care. Just to have the best possible way. We can piggyback on these top and surveys, and I think that's helpful. Every way that we can get data, and we can compare it. And I can get you a pretty good map with addresses of Hillsborough. So.
that would be great.
So.
I'm gonna, no, but I was just gonna say, I'm gonna get, have that QGIS software put it on my. Let's see. I guess you could drill down and do any type of overlay that you want to.
Yeah, as long as you got the data for it and it's loaded in.
And it's,
And I think,
it's over data set.
and I think that's something that he said he would be able to share is, you know, how to get the data sets.
Now, with respect to the service providers, I reached out to Consolidated, GWI, and I've heard back from them. They're very anxious to chat. I have not heard back from Shelley at Charter. I have no idea. I've left a couple of voicemails. I may send her an email. I can send her an email. So yeah, are you alive? Have you passed this under, you know, to somebody else? Who should I talk to?
Oh, and while I'm thinking of it, Roy, on Zoom, if you do visit the main Broadband Coalition website, they have a button for the current results, and that will show you the summary of the data. And
Okay,
it lists the company that provides the internet. And as we said, how many speed tests have been run? And I'm guessing it's a sort of an aggregate or average. The download, the upload, and not sure what CI is here, but, or maybe it's CL, might be latency, I'm not sure, but it's a small number.
okay.
That's just there. And it looks like the largest number of speed tests that have been conducted there. It's showing 40,000, a little over 40,000 locations with 3,285 done under Fairpoint Communications Incorporated. There are some other outliers that are the same company, but just grouped differently further down. But and that's the biggest number. The next biggest is Charter with 2,700.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that's using that at 234, and it just keeps up. So do we want to tackle questions?
Regarding survey questions in the comprehensive plan for winter, this is an anonymous reply. We're not getting addresses with this, just so you know ahead of time. That tax or not.
And Sam, do you want to work on the survey? The questions jointly or?
I think it makes sense to work on it jointly and come up with what we
Some
think the
uniform questions, and the data set that we can apply to the whole peninsula.
And then if there's other additional tweaking that happens at the planning or comp plan, comp level, then it can be adjusted, but at least we can express what we think are the important things.
I think that's really crucial because from a comp planning standpoint, they're not necessarily looking at it from a broadband perspective. It's just, this is new on the plate and they literally just added it in last week because it's becoming new. So we have a better understanding, I think, in this group to really address what needs to be answered.
Right. So I would just throw out there as a starting point, as already been said, do you have internet service? Is the logical first question. And then, as Paul said, if you don't have internet service, do you want it? Or is it of value?
And, you know, if you ask them what they use it for, you can probably get a pretty good idea of what person it is.
I think that would be a valuable question.
Surfing, shopping, yeah.
Telecom.
Opening my AOL.
Would you go with a,
Oh, hey, I still have.
I have people on AOL still that I send stuff to. That even still.
That's fine. That's was part of time.
Earthlink, I had an Earthlink.
Oh, my.
Earthlink, wow.
I didn't know that, so.
so as far as the use, do you want them to come up with their own? I would recommend suggesting.
I think so it's going to be a paper survey.
Yeah, it's gonna be a paper survey, so.
We could put like some, very broad primary uses like email, web browsing, streaming,
Streaming,
work from home,
School from home.
the biggest uses we could put there. And you could also include in other if there's something that might be important to them, but might not be one of those major items.
I'm always looking up. Just find out what people are doing sometimes. Get creative.
I mean, they're all their programming is coming over the internet for their television, that says something.
Mhm.
That's good. I think that should be.
Is it useful to us to know how many people in the household would use the internet?
I was just thinking that myself.
Sure.
How many
Number of
devices?
users or number of users or number of devices.
Yes.
We're only two in the household, and we have 7 devices.
That's what I'm thinking too,
And 3
right?
of them to be used at the same time.
I've got devices that I don't know I'm using. Right.
Honey, do you know this one?
Well, that,
For
that's,
two people, and got 6 devices.
that's the other thing, the Internet of Things with the smart home.
Yeah.
The thermostat, you know,
Doorbell.
refrigerator.
Security.
Siri,
Xbox.
Yeah.
Stuff for your Xbox.
That's why I don't know.
Alexa, Siri,
My son.
all your smart home. That's-
And he watches movies at the same time, so.
I realized they camera block on the computers. The camera, piece of, a post-it note over their camera. Yes.
We're just gonna,
I'll just report the list that we had for internet communication. We had job-related, school-related, friends and family networking, information research, local or home-based business, telehealth, security systems, entertainment, none of the above or other.
pretty good.
And that- So you've got a few more that we added here.
I think
So we'll
it's good
build on that.
coverage on it.
It's a useful list, but I just think that for most, many homes, there'll be another 6 or 8 devices there that they don't even know are connected to.
There are tools you can use, like I have through Bitdefender, does this home scan. And it detected 35 devices in my house alone.
Oh, I looked on my router at home one time because I was just trying to make sure nothing was using my internet that shouldn't be. And I saw this one thing and I could not for the life of me figure out the name of it, what it was. And then I blocked it. And 2 months later, my wife was like, "Oh, my little camera's not working anymore that we used to watch the cats." And I'm like, that's what it was.
Oh, yeah, nanny cams. Nanny cams.
So, yeah, there's no one way to really broadly capture that. Outside of smart home.
Do we need to know that? This is a consumer survey.
It is.
What we're drilling down to is who's gonna see
Or
a video,
technical training.
because if they're not gonna subscribe to a new service, then
Well, where it plays in is the user, the end user, right? When we're looking at grants, are they using it for telehealth or education? This is what impacts where they get funding
And work.
and work, right?
But
So it
even
tells you
then,
about your demographics and a way as well.
we really need to know what they think they're using it for,
Yes.
not necessarily the other devices.
yeah, that's
I
what
mean-
I agree with that.
I mean, I think knowing the other devices would be good,
Yeah.
but it's really what do they think they are using it for, or what they would like to use it for.
But you could have as one of those options be smart home. And that would cover a quite broad range of those auxiliary devices, thermostats and cameras. and so forth.
Like, first, you have, it's great that you have 5G, but are you using your cell phone to connect through the internet? I mean, making phone calls, you know, using my, yeah, Wi-Fi, forget about the tower or charger, that ain't gonna work. So,
That's what I've had to do, it's all through the internet rather than through the towers.
I have a Spectrum phone, so when I moved up here, this was the best phone that I could find, because I had T-Mobile and I have all these like phones from other places that are just sitting there, they don't work, but this one works everywhere.
So another question we had is what type of telephone service do you use? Check all that apply, landline, cellular, internet-based, VOI, and is it adequate?
can you run that again?
This is what type of telephone service do you use? Check all that apply, landline,
Right.
cellular, internet-based VOI, and is it adequate? Yes or no?
Oh, okay, sort of VoIP.
Like today.
Okay, yeah.
Voice, I
Voice
don't know.
over.
Voice over.
That's right.
Thank you.
So you shouldn't have a P on the end.
It should have a
Yeah,
P on it.
yeah.
See, I'm telling you.
Yeah,
we don't have
that's
to-
what I said.
I don't know what VOI is.
So I think that would be, it's a little bit tangential, but I think it'd be good to also draw out where people might have services bundled. Because if you have a landline as opposed to internet phone, I think it's probably routing a cable phone, a digital phone rather. You know, we know it's, at least it's a consolidated bill somewhere there. If it's digital phone, we know it's spectrum.
You guys look at the questions, I'll get it in front of people, I'll figure out a way. Even beyond our survey, whatever it makes sense.
How many questions do you have now on the survey?
I don't know what comp plan has on it right now. I don't know that she may have just one this, but it's not finished. She's been waiting for me.
And ours is already 11 pages long and we just sent it out for a test. Yeah, there's a lot of information. There's
Ours is
12
fun.
categories in the comprehensive plan. There's a lot of things to cover.
Wow.
But broadband's super important. It's not been brought up.
And comprehensive means big.
Yes. But this is another infrastructure. It's really important.
That's a lot of follow through for first ticket that, you know, I would be, if I, me, I'd be checking the post office to see what's in the revenue here as well. See how much, if there was any way to talk to Tim or in a prospect time, where we could say, hey, can you check to see how many surveys that were disclosed of or recycled?
Your return rate on
Yeah,
surveys tend to be pretty low in there.
Well, we intend to go door to door. But, you know, we're looking for a certain percentage and if that is not accomplished, then there'll be a door to door service of trying to get the answers.
I would suggest,
Shakedowns in the street.
Man,
Yeah, we want good answers.
I would suggest if we do want to include the question about the phone service, that we would also include, and you may have this next on your list, the question about television service. Because
Right, streaming.
streaming versus satellite versus cable.
I have every streaming service. Because we must follow Manchester United across the globe. Anything you want to know about soccer is happening.
Liverpool.
My team is Chelsea this year.
And then again, sufficiency.
And
Okay.
adequate sufficient.
See a little riot in Mexico, in the Liga. We had a big riot in the middle of the field, like 250 people injured. And don't you, yeah. The hooligans.
Those are good. Well, my son, his father's from Italy, and his grandfather played soccer professionally, so, yeah, I mean, I never was gonna escape it. So I decided to just become a fan. Pick a team that my son didn't like. Have that.
Good.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Any other survey questions that we would get value from?
Maybe just put out the draft of the survey questions, if we think of something, once we're looking at it, we can certainly add.
I would still say we should ask if they know what their service type is. Whether it's DSL with consolidated, cable with spectrum, satellite with HughesNet.
And in the same way, if they know what their,
What their rate, their
Their
rates are.
yeah,
If they pay the bill,
yeah,
Can you write those down or do you want me to write it?
What
You
the
went through
service.
about six services, yeah. You want them independently listed?
I would suggest, you know, DSL in parentheses, i.e. consolidated communications. Cable, parentheses, i.e. spectrum. Satellite, parentheses, i.e. HughesNet. Since, yeah, HUGHES.
Does it know?
Which is the third largest out of all the speed tests run. And then you could also have, well, that would still fall under satellite,
Yeah.
but you could also use cellular or mobile. Just put an IE hotspot.
Anytime, like I said, AT&T is the LTE hotspot that we're using.
And that's gonna, I mean, you could have fiber in there, but not to say we don't want to hear from the people who have fiber, but anybody who has fiber already is not going to get much out of this project.
The only other questions we have on our comp plan also is related to Zoom meetings, because this is new with COVID. The questions were specific to, would you like your municipality to offer meetings virtually? Ours does.
They don't even post the minutes on the website.
That's not applicable.
You're not the newsletter.
And we do get a
I
newsletter.
do get the newsletter.
Yeah.
Just picked it up.
But there's not, is there a reason to add any kind of question about virtual meetings or virtual access for other areas of the borough?
So I think, again, that's talking about an application. And that would be, to me, that's the work from home, that's the school from home question, that's up above. That's sort of an underlying technology that would be enabled by this. And if that's something that they would use it for, that's to me where they would put it. I don't think we need to. Also, there's more than just, there's
Yes.
Teams and Google, whatever. I blank. The only other question I would say, again, going back to the other survey, is the cost. If you do have it, what do you pay now? And if you're, and you may want to put in there in parentheses, if your services are bundled.
I mean, isn't there a range that we are, isn't there pretty much a definable market for price?
Basic, it's when you bundle everything else, and like Bob was saying, how much, like.
But like I said, if you've been signed up with Spectrum or you've been signed up with Consolidated for years and you've never changed, you are not doing yourself any favors with the rates, because you could be paying astronomically higher than what a new customer would get. So I think just it's good to get, more data doesn't hurt. If people are paying X amount,
Maybe a range.
Because I've seen also in some of the survey questions asking what we should pay. For-
I wouldn't do that.
I would hesitate to go, would you?
Right.
Just because that sounds like you are trying to get some kind of.
and it really, somebody who doesn't know what kind of service they would be paying for is really not gonna know.
Right.
But for example, like Spectrum, most of the times that I see it, and probably Consolidated for their basic tiers, less than $50 a month. And more of your business, you might want to do ranges, 50 to 100 or over 100. And I think that might get us, rather than asking people exactly what they're paying.
I feel like we pay $100 for each one of our fire. Town office.
Or could you
There's one
go
liability.
like to Spectrum and see what their pricing is for their basic, for their first tier, second tier, third?
They keep pushing $44.95 a month to me for their basic.
That's on the business.
That's residential.
President, right?
But that's not their good speeds though. I mean, I haven't been out there in a while, but that was for their basic service.
Well, the Spectrum in terms is minimum 100.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
I'm paying less than on Spectrum.
Oh,
No.
I'll make my.
Megabits.
Megabits.
Sorry,
Megabits
rate,
per
it's not
second.
rate.
Yeah.
What you're downloading.
I haven't been out there in a while, so maybe I need to be checking my
Surveys.
service.
Survey says.
Survey says, yes.
Well, we can also all just go onto their websites and pretend to sign up for service.
So actually, it's all published.
Yeah.
It's all published.
That's what I'm saying, is if we could get their published numbers and say,
Yeah, basic cable.
are you
Basic
paying?
internet speed.
Yeah.
And again, you get the, for 12 months, like I'm looking now for $49.99 for 12 months.
That's not, but that will represent what new customers would get. That's not representing what
That's
people
their
are paying.
first, yeah,
What we're paying. for
that's
those
their
big
first year. benefit.
customers for longer.
And then they'll bump it up. Yeah, they're gonna bump it up after 12 months, they'll bump it up.
I mean, I can tell you, I'm paying $142 a month, and that is for 100 meg. I'm cable TV, internet and cable TV.
So like I said previously in Eastbrook, you can now pre-order their fiber service. And you can get 1 gig internet for $70 a month.
1 gig, but that's the thing, a lot of people don't need the 1 gig unless you are a family that's streaming all the time.
Soccer from around.
Oh, yeah, they're involved, you know.
That's a question I always get with my customers.
That's right.
Well, Spectrum says they can move me up to this speed, or Consolidate says I can move up to this speed. I said, well, what are you trying to do with that speed? You know, if you're streaming 4K Netflix, you need 25 meg. Is that what you're trying to do? And I'm not saying people shouldn't get higher speed internet if it's available, but you know, it's always a cost question.
Well, but
Does it make
remember,
any sense?
when you have that kind of speed, you can get rid, like, I don't even have cable. I haven't had cable for years because, why? I don't care, I don't
No
need it,
cable.
so I don't need it. I
Roku,
need
Apple,
Soccer,
TV, and
I need weather.
then there's a program called News Now, which you can use, which you can local news.
Yeah.
Any live news.
Yeah,
from the,
I mean, I can get
WLBC,
local,
yeah.
I
I
have
have it from my wife has Fubo.
Yep.
And still watch
Tubi,
Tubi. Yeah,
not too
but
bad.
I mean, yeah, I just got to put that next time.
I think I got the gist of the survey. Is there anything else?
Rambling.
There's use applications and there's just trying to figure out what they.
the thing I'm pointing out is that once people have high speed internet, their choices are huge at that point.
Right.
I don't spend anywhere near what I used to spend on TV.
I think, but a lot of that is education, and if you have customers or neighbors, whatever, in the community, RSU 24, the adult education has all of these classes free and available to learn about connectivity, to switch from cable and get onto live streaming and reduce your cost. So just trying to encourage our neighbors to get out there and understand more what the benefits are, if it's something that they're interested in.
A lot of the cutting the cable is that we become more computer geek after a while, setting stuff up. Let's go, like, here's my Roku, here's my Apple TV, and give me my
It's
channels.
pretty, I mean, it's not terrible. I can do it.
Actually, in the
I'm
case
sort of
when I
savvy, semi-savvy.
I'm still dealing with people with flip phones, so.
I would love to have a flip phone.
We do, we can right now, it's one, more,
Except sometimes I wonder things and I need to.
you know.
Just use a cable from the phone to the TV. That's it. All right.
So,
Roles and
All right, so
responsibilities, the first thing we came
Questions,
here for.
that's our goal
I
right
think
now.
our first question is what's the next meeting?
But we need to put together some questions,
Yeah.
because unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to get it put on that survey, so.
So Sandy, you collected them and
Yep,
then
I
you're going,
collected that from Bob.
You will look them over and everybody will bless them and destroy it. Do the final, and then send it.
I need to have it done on Thursday.
We have other things that we needed to accomplish.
yeah, we need to figure out treasurer and secretary, even though we're not gonna be having money for a little while still. Probably want to iron out those roles. And thank you, Anne, for taking notes today. I don't know if you want to do that indefinitely.
I'm not sure that I can, I have to like. I know there's all kinds of things that I'm not allowed to do.
But Sandy,
because I work for
you seem
the
like a natural note taker.
Without capacity though. I'm sorry to say. I appreciate that vote of confidence, but it's stretch beyond capacity. So I appreciate if someone else to take it on.
I mean, it's pretty easy because you can watch the recordings.
Yeah.
Do your minutes that way as well, whatever you do. That's how I'll be doing it.
Well, and the other side of that as well is we will be having the recordings indefinitely. And those, honestly, I feel like those somewhat preclude the need for immediate.
It's required by town ordinance for us, so I got it.
You need minutes, you don't
Yeah.
necessarily.
So put them in a notebook and call it minutes and then file it far away. It's a dark hall.
So let me ask this question because I'm coming from the school board mindset. What we are told and how we've always done it is your minutes basically look like this was discussed and any action taken.
Right, there's an action taken. If you ever see them, I do the minutes for board of selectmen, if you ever see them, it's all in bold. Anytime the selectmen do anything, fold it out. So anytime that you make a decision about doing something, that will be forward. And what we talked about, Bob and I, is like, one of the things that's gonna make this project successful in the long term, because it is a long-term project, is that it's maintaining the momentum in the community and keeping people excited about it and keeping them on track. You know, and part of that is recording what happens. And I, you know, if we wanna do a regular update on our website, we wanna do a regular update in our newsletter, I need information, I need interesting information to put in there to keep that alive, because frankly, and I listen to all day long, people call me townspeople and gripe about whatever the gripe of the day is. And you know, one of the things, like everywhere in this country, is that people feel the government is disconnected from what the people need. And so I think a lot of what's going to make this project successful is having the support of the community, because it's a big project. It's a lot. It's a lot for a little town like us with, you know, we have one guy that runs the infrastructure and he's slammed, you know that. We really need the community to kind of rally around this plan, because there are more people out there that can be helpful than we already know about.
Well, matter of fact, and I just picked up the newsletter in there, it was handed it to Mark, is,
That's why. Yep.
yep,
You did that thing?
oh, you did this, okay.
It's supposed to be on our website.
Which actually, that has been a good series.
I've been to all of them.
I've been to most of them.
Yeah, I've been to most of them also, and it's really, I was saying that it would be nice if, before people vote on broadband when we get down the road, it should be required that they at least listen to this to understand all of the work that goes into. We're not just coming up with a random idea and putting broadband. There's a lot of work that we have to do in the next year or two, or three, whatever it takes.
And those people are already have started to apply for the money.
Oh, yeah,
That's good information.
That's why we're gonna start with our startup.
Yeah.
Looking at that startup. And get in their face, get on the radar for main broadband. Because like I said, it's not just about our need for broadband, but we have a lot of other things going on in this community that benefit to the state. And these people need.
So on that, about getting on the grant takes us to treasurer, because we need to identify who's gonna hold the money if you get a grant.
Well, the startup grant is for the hiring the kid.
No.
The answer, no?
Island Institute, quick update on that. Ann and I have submitted the host site application. There's no need for fiscal sponsor on that. Island Institute handles all of the hiring, the insurance, blah, blah, blah. We're just providing advisors. So we will be linking this fellow with the committees, broadband committee, comprehensive committee, with the needs and work that needs to be done through the committees in a collective way. So there's no funding that needs to be worried about on that aspect, but the main grant you're talking about
Yeah,
is a fund,
And I
that
mean-
was the grant that I brought to Winter Harbor, and they declined it right now because they don't want to bring in computers and have Zoom meetings.
that's fine. We can handle, we will reserve for all of our committees. So we have, you know, it's not full time, we have a treasurer that's all she does.
Mhm.
You know, and so.
And the question is just, what do you want to do with that connection, that first grant? You're talking about the $5,000 startup grant, right? Yeah. Yeah, I say apply for it as soon as you can. I'm not sure what we need it for. I've done the whole
But
thing.
you guys have to approve that. Make a motion. Second.
I so move that we apply for the grant. Is that what you need?
Second.
Paul,
The ground.
Paul McGrath.
We need a treasurer and secretary.
So here's a silly question. Eve is the treasurer for the other, who's the treasurer?
Alita.
Alita's the treasurer? Now, she's not a member of the committees that she's treasurer for. So would there be a reason that, I mean, I don't know what role a treasurer would have on our committee that would be any different than any other committee.
Oh, I don't think you need it.
Okay, so
I think
we
it can
can
be
insert,
held, I think it can be held by our treasurer with all of the full funds for all of our committees. And I think bills for those committees.
Goldsboro applying for the grant because we know Winter Harbor isn't doing it, so there's no mixing. So then maybe we don't need a treasurer, maybe Alita can just.
We just need a secretary or someone to take minutes. And
Provide
I can do it.
provide the budget information, so once the grant comes in, I'll manage.
I don't
it.
mind to do it for a while, but you know my life and I can't always get here.
And, you know, of course, we lost, not that I would necessarily suggest Larry as a secretary, but we did lose Larry. He did resign. Tom is not here. I thought he said he might be, but
I mean, I think there's probably some value. I mean, all day long, I have people calling saying they want to be on the broadband thing, but they're not there. So there's probably, it's worth calling folks, and maybe with all the numbers and you know, like that. So it's say, you know, really, I feel like we just need a really strong group. It's gonna take that.
for secretary, like I said, with minutes, we're not looking for play-by-play discussion of who said what. We're just looking for a general.
Oh, Peter Drinkwater.
It's gonna depend on when your meetings are. He's usually not available till after 5 o'clock.
So
I mean, for like, handle the grants. I mean, businessman familiar with money.
He's a real estate kind of guy as well. And
Yeah,
he's just filling in the home stuff.
My background's really,
That's true.
I don't like to. And I mean, the money has to be held from our bank, you know, we held everything in our.
Oh, no.
It's just helpful in keeping a track of it. Have one person that's not connected to any of these committees, watching the money and looking at the expenses. And I don't, you know, when I get an invoice for one of the committees, they have to sign off on it. The chair has to sign off on it before all of these supposed to pay. So there's a, you know, have a fiduciary obligation
I
on some
think
level.
that seems like a perfectly acceptable solution.
Yeah.
For the money side of things.
Okay.
But we still need someone, and like I said, I'm happy to do minutes, but I need like a backup, if someone can do it for some reason. You have to do it. So anytime, like, we do board of selectmen meetings, you know, I'm a zombie. I mean, I'm from Monday on Friday, it starts, everything has to be ready for that meeting. It's my job to get everything ready for that meeting.
Can I get clarification? Are you thinking of keeping the meeting times this day and this time? That's where my conflict may be.
So.
I have a full-time job for this as well.
I mean, it's very much been sort of off the cuff so far. When we have the meetings, we can figure out a regular time. If there is a regular time that works better for people, we'll do it that way.
Well, let's see who's really devoted to being here and being part of this project, and then let those people decide. People that are gonna show up and contribute and really get involved, that's, I think, whose schedules should be accommodated.
Well, I think for the most part, that's pretty much the people who are here now are the people who've been at most meetings in either remotely or in person.
Yeah.
So I mean, if Tuesday or Thursday afternoons at 1 o'clock works for most everybody, we can confine our meetings to those time frames. You know, I will say my time is increasingly chewed up. I don't think I can commit to evening meetings. That's difficult for me. Obviously, it's convenient that I work here, so.
With travel.
And I think also that we need to get together and town office this and stuff, especially in the summer. And whatever we are.
And also, this location was selected partially because we could be spread out and the COVID precautions. But, you know, depending on the feelings of the committee, that may not be something as time goes on that you feel as strong a need for.
That follow along with Governor Mills. If she makes an executive decision to say off the mask.
Well, I mean, we have to have masks here because that's the National Park Service.
Yes.
But if we were operating outside of park lands and whatever the venue is, what their requirements are. Yeah.
And we can use Jason's club too. Next door, so if they ever need-
Especially once there's good internet there.
Yeah, exactly. And heat. Heat is the most expensive part of using the ordinance.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'm gonna try and bring it in a little bit here. We have a motion and a second to approve using the town hold and maintain
And apply.
and apply for the grants. Is there anything else we want to talk about on that before we vote?
Other than how you want to set them on.
We don't decide that yet.
Well, the grant, so you'll come back to the grant application, because that all has to be set on.
On the startup?
Yeah.
I didn't see that on the startup, not the startup. Kind of broad brush. They want to know that we have something. But I mean, I think we know what we're doing, right? Our first task is to gather data and see. And define the scope of work first. Scope out the scope of work.
Yeah.
All right. Just gonna clarify, we're just all gonna use a single vote here. Again, I'm coming from RSU where there are weighted votes, but I think it makes sense for this committee to
We just need
operate.
a motion and a second to move forward on the applying for the grant.
We have a motion and a second. I just want to be clear on that. So if there's no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Unanimous. So, Alita's got another pot of money to look after.
She'll be thrilled.
With respect to the survey, do we have a date that we want to make it, these are going to be the questions?
Sooner than later, and let me call you back. I need to talk to Deb. I sent her a text, but she's in Sudan where internet is.
Okay.
Sandy, you had a short deadline on the survey questions, didn't you?
Just because we're meeting again Thursday, so we put out our first test survey. We're kind of at the same date of, we're ready to go public with our survey. So this is a new twist that we've got to update because we were both about ready to go public.
Okay.
So
So
Sandy and I will be working behind the scenes.
All right, so we can do this so we can communicate via email or
Yes,
the old fashioned telephone.
yeah.
So we can accomplish that. Okay.
I'd say ideally, if we could have any updates or additional questions, I mean, you can probably email us what you've taken down.
Yes.
And we'll be able to look at that probably later tonight. And if there's any additional thoughts, send them directly to Ann, at least for Gouldsboro. And who should we send to for Winter Harbor? You?
Yeah, you can send it right through to me.
You want to just send them to the mailing list? That way everyone can contribute, you know,
So
something.
they're running
occurs.
their mailing list.
Sure.
Well, sure, but at least to the people who are responsible for hearing the questions. and
Right.
answering.
Well, like Roy's the only one that's not here.
Yeah.
And literally has a contribution. So I would like his input too. You know,
Yeah,
everybody's
He's on the email.
Okay.
So he's gonna see.
There's all kinds of people on these, so.
Just a question for you, Sandra.
Yes.
At the last Winter Harbor meeting, we scheduled something for Thursday at 5 o'clock.
That's correct.
Are we still doing that?
Um,
And could we discuss those questions there and kind of finalize?
I'm happy to do Just a
Either that or I'll take it off my calendar and not be there.
What do you, Bob, do you want to
Thursday at 5?
quick check-in?
Yeah, we can do that.
I think it was right before your
It
meeting with
was,
the,
yeah, because we didn't know if this was gonna be scheduled, so we had that as a placeholder. That's fine.
and not to exclude anyone, but that was the meeting at 5 o'clock. Winter.
So that'll be the
Town Hall.
deadline to be, if anybody wants to check in at 5 o'clock at the Winter Harbor Town Office. Otherwise, if you're not gonna be present, just make sure that we have all updates by like 4 o'clock.
Is that your comp?
Thursday.
Your comp?
Complicated, yeah, so I'd like to make sure that we have updated information to share with them Thursday, and hopefully we can get that finalized, so we know what our survey is. Does that make sense? Responsive by 4 o'clock Thursday, or show up 5 o'clock if you're able to. I'm sorry, but it won't be virtual.
Come at 6.
We did not get approval to do virtual meetings.
Well, I thought I had it in my calendar, March 10th at 7 o'clock.
No, it was 5 o'clock.
That's easy to check.
Yeah.
Stroke
And Mark, you know that the showdown is between Liverpool and Man City this year. Are you on that? I want to know who to call.
Oh, who's jump on?
So I would just throw out
I
a
love it.
suggestion that to the extent that it works with Can's schedule, if you're okay taking the minutes.
Yeah, I will, believe me, I love to come and do this, because it's a great for me, not it is my life, but,
We have a fellow in September.
And I would suggest for the time being, at least, we consider Ann the treasurer, the secretary, and then if there's a meeting that doesn't work, we'll just have to have somebody else take notes.
be my backup secretary,
And we can figure that out as it comes along.
the understudy.
Does that make sense?
We just gotta get to
Sure,
September. And the fellow.
Yes. Then we'll dump that on the fellow, as long as they know how to do it. You know, young people don't know how to write anymore.
So then for the purposes of that, I would nominate Ann as the secretary.
Second.
Close discussion.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
I
I have to abstain. So, Roy. We good?
All right, next meeting?
If you barely put it down Thursday at 5 o'clock, if anybody wants to just come up. This is just a survey review update. Otherwise, email by 4 o'clock. To Ann and I, so that we can finalize anything that's a meetings.
And I will send out an email this afternoon or in the mornings, depending on when Deb does and gets back to me. And see how much time we can get for Hillsborough. Because I think their next meeting is gotta be coming up. Are you on that board, Mark?
Would it make sense for Roy or Bob to email the comp plan chairpersons directly and say our committee has come to this, or how would you like to communicate that to those committees? So that they know that we're putting together some additional survey questions.
Ours is pretty informal. I mean, that's my friend, so I'll follow it down. Sneak some questions.
So you are on the comp plan?
I am on the comp plan. I just don't know formality if it
Right.
needs to come from the committee chairs to the committee chairs.
I don't think we need to get bogged down with being too formal. I think we can operate reasonably informally here. So if you're on the comp plan committee and has contact on the comp plan committee, I'd say let's just use the existing channels, the easiest channel. It doesn't have to funnel through the chairs, I don't believe. In the same way that Mike Summers, the main broadband connection. I think it makes sense to use what we already have.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that it probably makes sense to figure out what we want to do at the next meeting before we set a meeting date, because that might determine when it makes sense to me.
Let's find out what the comp plans, what that timetable looks like, and then I think then we can I'll put together an agenda. That's fine. If you guys want to come up with one, and Bob, we can hang out and talk.
Well, I think once we
Would,
Yeah.
would it be good to have a tentative date of the first Tuesday of the month? I mean, if that's often enough, or if we need to do it more frequently.
I think eventually it's gonna have to be more frequently.
I think there'll be a point there, but are we, do we have enough to do it
That's what I'm thinking.
bi-weekly
is
or?
There may not be enough to warrant coming together. and
Let me
meeting.
see what we can find out from the comp committees, and then we'll know.
Because there's gonna be, when is the survey supposed to go out? As soon as possible. So,
As soon as it's approved by, for us, as soon as the survey's approved by the comp planning committee and then blessed by the board of selectmen, it'll be handed off to my office and
That's 3 to 4
it'll
weeks.
enter the,
So we're talking
Days of
April or?
so there'd be a month
Maybe
before there's
sooner.
really be
it could
anything.
be sooner.
maybe by
Like
the
I
end
said,
of-
I can't
Right.
precisely answer that till I talk to Deb, but,
Mhm.
or Jones.
But even so, once you do approve it, say it's 2 to 3 weeks before it gets approval, there really won't be anything to deal with until some data starts coming back in.
Well, we still have to apply for the grant.
Mhm.
We need to figure out how to get our hands on some of this survey data off the stuff, that mission broadband survey, whatever we can get out of that. Like I said, I think we agreed that we should collect data from multiple sources so that we can kind of amalgamate that data and see where the correlation is, where do we see that? Where things are lining up for us, because that's the most important part of this picture. So that's, everything hinges on the what, the when, the where, how
Well,
much.
If you want to, we could set a tentative meeting 2 weeks out, like the 22nd, and then if we feel there's not enough reason to actually have it, we could cancel it.
It's easier for me if it's scheduled than canceled.
I agree.
I
agree. Something to keep in mind as we're doing this is getting information out to the newsletter. So last time we were able to get this out to Wake Harbor. So thinking about our meeting dates and if they fall in line with deadlines for newsletters, what do we want to put in the next newsletter? Because I think it's important to keep information out to the community.
Yeah, our, gosh. It's like the last 20.
This is a-
22nd.
Ours is a 20.
I should know that, but
Yeah. So the
I
20th
will
is
know
the
that
deadline.
by the time I send out. an email.
I saw where the comp meeting is tomorrow.
And Brianna does not like it when people are late.
Ooh.
It's-
So this
Well,
next
it
meeting
is
is
the
after the
worst, yeah.
newsletter, correct? You said the 22nd?
So the 22nd would be 2 weeks from today,
Okay.
and I've been told that this building is available at least until April, and we don't have anything scheduled on Zoom for the 22nd. So that would be wide open from the Schoodic Institute perspective.
And if they don't, if ultimately they will let us use this, I'm sure we can use it, but
Yeah.
it's not cold,
Yeah, and,
and it's nice and big, the tables and space.
we probably won't be really busy here for quite a while still, so it's just, there's nothing in here until sometime in April, so after that. It could be like the data he's got, if there's one thing we're using it, but we can still schedule around too, if people want.
So we're gonna do the 22nd, 1 o'clock, the same time?
22nd at 1 o'clock, sounds good, and I'll set up the Zoom meeting and email it out to people.
And do we want to put something out in the newsletter since we're going to be after? On the committee?
So what sort of things, what tidbits would we say are,
Announce the new committee,
here's where
the
they are?
elected persons,
We can,
have a survey.
The other thing is I have to, every select meeting, I give a broadband update, so I like to have a little input for them. I've got the support of also the elderly American, that's really good stuff in for us. Pump up our plan. there's a million ways to get to the people of these communities.
Right.
And that's one of them. People still read the paper, so.
You guys have a Facebook page?
We do, but it's currently not maintained. I probably make that happen again. It was quite an
Put the
episode.
survey questions maybe on the
Yeah.
Facebook page. Because then you know people have internet.
I guess as far as going back to your request for information on the Winter Harbor newsletter, influence growth. Do we really have anything we need to tell them, or is there something that we want to keep in front of them?
Well, maybe just tell them the survey's coming.
That would come from the comp committee, though.
That's, they do need to take the survey, so speed test is gonna be really important, I think that should be in probably every month till we get our numbers, right?
Yeah.
Speed test.
Something that we could just
I mean, we
do.
put it in our newsletter every month. It's on our website.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that, you know, I told
Squeeze
Dana and the
another
rest of them, I said, you old guys, you're out there talking to everybody, everyone take that survey.
I just looked at it again, make sure. And it's Survey Monkey. Do you have access to those stats?
I think we can get it. I mean, we're hard
Just to
get
see
some
if it is, you know.
That's
how
why
many
we were
people are-
asking that, the guy for mission. I only worked with John before, so this guy's new, but I'm sure we can get it, whatever it is. you know. But, you know, it's limited to people that actually have it.
Right, and like if you had access to see if people are clicking on it, I know I've done it wherever I've built different locations, different devices.
Yeah.
There it is.
So I mean, as far as an update is concerned, I'd say it's official that the two towns are working together on the project. That might be something that's worth letting people know. And that, you know, we're put in some questions that are going to be part of the comp plan survey. So, you know, be on
And
the
at some
lookout for
point,
that.
I think we should do little bios on some of the people so that they know that we're not just a bunch of yahoos. At least you guys know, you're not a yahoo, you're not, boys not a yahoo, you're not a yahoo. Just us yahoos every year.
I'm
We did
more of a Google
But I mean,
person than
you know, it's a confidence builder for people.
Well, and we're
It lets
recruiting,
them know that, like,
Well, and I think maybe recruiting might be a good
we
method
gotta
too.
recruit a secretary.
that's
Yeah.
how you recruit. That's how you recruit good people, is by having good people. So I think we need to keep the community, you know, in the hearts and minds of the community all the time.
Would somebody like to put together just 2 or 3 sentences on what that should say, and do we want consistency from the 2 newsletters?
Since I'll probably be the one that writes whatever goes in my newsletter.
I think it would make sense if there's going to be a broadband committee update that goes out in each newsletter. It would make sense to be the same update.
Unified.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's really important.
Do you have a the calendar section? There's like, whatever it is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think having
I just
that
looked at
schedule
it
would
today,
be-
as a
Yeah.
comp committee was tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
Right.
As well as previous archives.
We could ask to get, and that's good. They know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, she'll put anything that I tell her, I just need to have it. So, yeah,
So, okay, so
it's
you want
monthly for us.
this, we'll throw actually for that, so Winter Harbor printed these off for free and put them out because we're part of the municipality. They attach it in the newsletter that gets mailed out at no additional cost.
I put it there and then the website.
Would we want to do another one and maybe each one, we don't have to do this next month if we don't want to, but, for example, Northern Light Health just did an assessment on broadband and why it's important for them and telehealth. This is a 2-page document that, I don't remember the gentleman's name. Anyway, they pulled this off of their research and surveys that they've done for telehealth locally. So it's something like this that each month we can put out something
I agree, I
new.
think that's great.
Maybe next month would be something education wise or.
I think people should
I
understand
think
that
that's a good
the
idea.
application of broadband is massive. It isn't just
Right.
internet
It's
and
not just
email and
watching
TV.
YouTube or.
The Veterans Association.
Liverpool
has-
versus Man City. It's not just about that. It's not
Full
just Premier
videos.
League.
Would that be accessible then
Yes.
We include this in
All
the
this stuff
newsletter.
that we can do with it.
And if any of you have additional, I know the Veterans Association has something similar, I haven't found it, but if we could have a 1 page each month that tells about,
I'd
The
rather
importance.
VA stuff.
okay, something like that would be really helpful just for the next month, and we could do one for education 1 month.
I'm gonna do shellfish. Do shellfish lab,
Just the
plant
reasons
lab, all that, because Bill is gung ho to get on, to get
How do you
involved.
do that, but having the meeting at 6 o'clock in the town office and then meeting at the women's club at 6?
Because I have delegating skills.
Oh,
Mike Pinkham is the clam dad, and so he comes to my office every week to tell me what's going on. And we know what the what the application of it is out there. So
So,
just to have people understand all the places, all the things that broadband reaches. It's not just the houses, there's a lot going on around here that I challenge that a lot of people don't know about, that live here. That live here, don't know about it.
what is our time frame in the broad perspective of bringing broadband to Wilkesboro and Winter? Are we looking?
Getting rid of the pen, like that.
Shovel ready.
Well, never
Yeah.
complete the walls.
Ribbon
Right.
cutting,
Ribbon cutting,
Ribbon
so when
cutting.
people ask, well, are we talking by summer, end of summer, Christmas next year, 2024?
When is the money running out?
Well, that, I guess is a big question.
I don't know.
When do we have to get, ask for the money? It's really gonna be,
well, we're gonna
Yeah.
start asking for the money now, because there's 3 phases of funding for the state.
right,
And the first phase is startup. And then, but it's so important that we define the scope of work first. That's when we can answer those questions. So I don't even, when people ask me that, when are we gonna have it? Right? I can't answer that yet.
Yeah, the vendors,
Because I
you know,
can give you a BS answer. I
getting the
don't know.
vendors here, whether we have an RFQ or an RFI rather,
RFI.
request for information from the vendors, either we do it separately or have them all here. I've been into enough vendors meetings in my life
You know,
on that. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we want to do. Here's the information that we've gathered.
the most important part, go ahead.
How does this fit in with you? What can you do for me?
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
You
If
know?
they cannot monetize our data, they're gone. They're gone. So that's why that piece of it is critical.
Yeah,
And I want
absolutely.
it from I want no stone, I want every squirrel asked what's going on with broadband for you.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to weigh in. There's 1,600 people in Wilkesboro, what, 5, 7, 800 in Weir Harbor.
It's not people, it's devices. Talk about it. That are in-
Okay, but I mean, people are gonna be filling out the survey, so
Right.
Sorry.
it shouldn't be hard to get that many people, even 80%.
Well, this is the thing on surveys, you're lucky if you get a 10% response, honestly.
Depends on how important the subject
Well,
is too.
yeah, people is like, I gotta worry about putting gas in my car, I don't need to worry about, broadband, but. And pretty much if you take a 10% response, it's gonna, and you compare it against trending from other locations, it's gonna be in line. It's really not gonna deviate that much. But definitely, we can't move forward without it. So, I mean, that is the crucial piece.
To me, that's the most important thing that we're gonna be doing. for
Yeah.
the next
Is there a
little
need?
bit.
I think, and it may be to our benefit that this is part of the comp plan survey, because then it's not just broadband, because as we know, somebody who's, if it's just a broadband survey, somebody who's already well served may not respond because they don't feel it's particularly important. But if it's part of a larger survey, then you'll get more data points for the already reasonably well served areas.
I think it also sets a standard that the towns really care about this as future infrastructure. Putting it into the comprehensive plan really sets the stage for that.
Or at least the
Historically.
comp plan committee feels that.
Yeah, well, we've got the questions on it. No, we recognize this is the next infrastructure of the community. It's an economic development, it's telehealth, it's education.
And
Yeah.
even-
Property value, you guys, it comes down to that, always. Everybody I know in the town is always looking at how much houses are for sale. That's ridiculous. you know?
Right.
Okay.
Because and broadband availability is huge. And we're seeing, I hear it from realtors all the time, I hear it from people that buy in houses, especially for children, you know, they gotta have it. So they're hooked.
A friend of mine, and she's got $1 million property out in Marlboro, right on the water.
Thinks he got the
And
strength.
she's using satellite because that's all she has, and she also has a business, and so voice over IP does not cut it because of latency.
Mhm.
You know, the main.
And you see, these are the people that are our champions, we must reach out to them. I have no shame, I will go anywhere and ask anyone for help. If it's something that I think is really important.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Knock on doors.
those are the community leaders. Whether you like it or not.
All of that to your question about timeline. I'll share with you that the Comprehensive Planning Committee of Winter Harbor hopes to have a town meeting for voting in June of 2023. We have an aggressive schedule for the comprehensive planning. So if we follow in line with that, I would imagine that this may come to, I don't know if it would be shovel ready in June of 2023 or not. I think that would be an aggressive schedule for this committee.
But for that, would we already been through the RFP process?
I would hope
And
so.
so,
We should,
I would hope so.
we figure what, are we gonna put a drop dead date for people to respond by on the survey?
We have
I mean, yeah.
to move
Does this-
forward,
On
to
the
move forward
company, yeah.
into vendor, soliciting vendors, we gotta have a pretty good stuff.
But it's not our survey, it's the comp plan survey,
We
so.
have a short time. I wanna say it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I mean, it's only gonna be out for a
But
short
we're a
term.
small town, I guarantee you that reviewing and compiling that data is gonna get dropped on my girls. I know it will. And me, which means me too, which is fine.
So I mean, we get the data presumably once it's tabulated at the town office level. And then, I mean, we don't have to think of our work in terms of what the comp plan specifies, except as far as it concerns broadband.
Yeah.
So then we can just take that data and run with
We
it.
were
as best.
piggybacking on this thing.
mhm.
The town, the town is paying for this survey. The money that's allocated to that committee comes from the town. So, and Board of Selectmen, and especially the town manager, is super hardcore about getting their money's worth, everything for the town, that's for the town. We need to use that for the town, that's for the people. So we take that data, I don't think there's any problem with that happening. It's overlap, and it saves money from, doing our own survey.
Let me rephrase my question. What is the time frame to go to either an RFI or an RFP? Okay, we're still not there.
Yeah, we're not-
Okay, so I'm just trying to get some idea.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's gonna be, you're talking 2 to 3, when Larry and I were talking about it, he was thinking initially that we've done during the summertime. So I told him, this is, if we want to, we have everything submitted for finances and some sort of semi-gel plan going in.
And
You're-
more
you're
importantly-
contacting all these contractors and you're.
There's number one answer right there is contractors. You know how hard it is to get anything done right now? It's
Get them to
ridiculous.
call that.
I-
That's-
I mean, you forget about getting something done to your house, it's 2 years out for most builders.
I get part, when you bring up summer and our numbers swell here, we have to be prepared to hit those people who are the summer residents or the summer visitors or.
And if they see the newsletters and they see more information on that, and they're, for the most part, they're coming here and they're gonna use the internet heavily. I know this, I've been consulting for something.
I mean,
Mhm.
most of the stuff's booked out already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got all these
About
people that
that.
have like BDROs and,
Oh, yeah,
Airbnbs and-
and, for their marketing, if they're BBROs or whatever, that they're gonna wanna say, yeah, we're out getting broadband, we need to get their support in here.
Yep.
Because frankly, the 500 people more or less, who are in Winter Harbor doing it versus the 2,000 when you are at your summer peak, right?
So
It's
just to that point, the survey is going out to all mailing addresses, basically.
I think it's going out to, whatever Brianna uses for the newsletter, is the same mailing list.
Because if it's,
And I'm thinking it might be the same list for property tax, but local. That list maybe, I don't know, let me ask her.
Yeah, I'll have to get clarification on that.
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
my
Go back
question
and
too
forth
about-
to registered voters.
or is it
There's a lot of
mailing
people on that.
addresses?
because if it's based on the property tax list of Trio, which would make sense.
Mhm.
Because, it's not just people who live here, it's the person who owns the property here. And because if it's VRBO, it's not the people staying there, it's the people.
Yeah, but it goes bulk, and bulk is,
So what I was ultimately getting at is when those summer people are here, I'm not thinking of the people that are renting the camps and so forth. I'm thinking of the grindstone people, the money families. It might be worthwhile just targeting a later wave of a survey. It might be something that we just have to do as a committee. To the people who are the big money people who are here all summer.
Summer survey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The only reason I'd be interested in the visitors is more marketing. For the long term. What other businesses can we bring into the community that we want? And yeah, for getting who already owns property here, yes, it's important. But to see the opportunities that having a broadband, which is the Peninsula, might help the Peninsula do more of what we want to do, depending on what the company says.
Well, maybe that's something we could reach out through the newsletters as well, and address those rental property owners directly and say, something that you can do as well is, if you don't, whatever your internet situation is, engage with your people who are renting and reach out to them, because we don't have a way to reach them directly unless we go to or going on rental properties, which is kind of creepy.
Yeah.
But they could, maybe ask the question.
Would you rent for another week if you had high-speed internet?
Right.
Stay longer.
Would you stay another,
That's- yeah.
okay, let's not forget, you can charge more.
would you charge more?
You can charge more.
Yeah.
Ask West Day, campground. Oh, yeah, he had fiber delivered directly because he's got multiple. He's a high tech.
Smart,
Yes,
so smart.
yeah, he needs to be on. It's that from something.
I mean, that's another thing, that, like I said, we need to make this a high profile committee. Want to get everybody on this, at least coming, whether they join the committee and participate, at least as they come. That's good, publicity.
So I think the summary survey, maybe that could be the next agenda item, and also business related,
And
and
we'll
on the
have money.
Chamber of Commerce, so we can send it out to the chamber, but that won't necessarily get you Airbnb because they're not necessarily registered, but they're enough, if we could come with a list, if we know people that are maintaining multiple homes or residences, that would be helpful to pretty
I'll find out where we're using, where we get our own list and see if there's any issue with using property tax addresses.
So like I said, with the bulk mailing, if you're just gonna take it to the post office and say all mailing addresses within these zip codes, which is sort of how the RSU does it for
Yeah.
most of its bulk
That's
mailing,
how-
then you just.
It's
You're not even,
$250
Yeah.
a month to mail out the Goldsboro newsletter.
I would recommend that we wait till April, I think it is, or May. I know with Winter Harbor, the PO boxes, there's only like 50% of them being used right now. Once the summer folks get back, and we do the bulk mail, we'll go right into their PO box. A lot of folks are not using those PO boxes to like
I mean, we should put them, they should be everywhere. They should be at the stores. They should be
Post office.
post office, they should be everywhere.
At the pump.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
It's open tomorrow?
I was gonna say they're opening this week
All
sometime.
right.
I mean, I think that there's value in promoting this,
Absolutely.
you know. I really believe that. We talked about this for the first time we met, about the importance of maintaining that momentum and excitement.
Yeah, I think open communicating at this point is a good thing.
Right, I have to go back to the job.
Yep.
We did it.
Kenny,
Well, thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're tired of it.
All right.
Roy, you still there? You
Roy,
You're so quiet.
when are you coming?
Still here.
When are you coming to Goldsboro?
Be up there probably the beginning of May
Excellent.
and then leaving because we're renting our house July and August, and then we're moving up in the fall permanently.
So you're gonna start asking your renters about broadband.
Well, I got a good situation, you know, got Spectrum's 100 meg, and I got the house all wired for wireless, so they're in a good shape. Actually, it's better there than it is here in the middle of Pennsylvania.
Well, at least we got that in our favor.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, Ryan, take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank you.
Michelle, make sure that we're gonna send it out and actually get that recorded.